Welcome to the Inner Fire Climbing Podcast. I am Jesse Firestone. My guest on the pod today is Marisa Michael. Marisa is a registered dietitian. She's a board-certified specialist in sports dietetics. She holds a master's degree in sports nutrition. She also holds an International Olympic Committee diploma in sports nutrition. I'm not sure there are any other nutrition credentials left for her to get. She's a prominent figure in the climbing nutrition science space, a published researcher. She's on the IFSC Medical Subcommittee for Nutrition and also on the USAC Medical Committee. I think I said at the end of the recording that this interview and preparing for this interview, I probably learned the most out of the podcasts I've done so far. Climbing nutrition science is pretty young, but it's really interesting. Especially interesting to me is just how focused and clear the takeaways are from the science and how little penetration those messages seem to have into the general climbing public. At one point, we talk about how there hasn't been a single dietary intake study for climbers that shows that climbers are eating enough to support their activity level. Let me repeat that just because it's crazy. Not a single study shows that climbers eat enough. So we'll see how that changes in the next few years, but it's good to have people like Marisa working on it for sure. Unfortunately, Marisa's internet went out during our first session and we had to reschedule the second half. I did my best to stitch them together, but apologies if you notice anything weird. The first half is climbing nutrition science, where it's at, what we know. Thankfully, we got into a good flow in our second session, and the second half is jammed with info on fueling, electrolytes, different disciplines and goals, disordered eating, body image, some patron questions and conclusions. So if you want the practical stuff, stay tuned for the second half. And without further ado, here we go. Good morning, Marisa Michael. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Are you a coffee drinker?
No, I'm actually not at all.
No. Do you avoid caffeine completely or?
No, I don't drink coffee for religious reasons, actually.
Gotcha. Yeah. So are you, I don't know how the rules work. Are you allowed to have caffeine or it's the caffeine that you can't have? Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, just not coffee and tea. Yeah. So
just
I do drink
coffee
sometimes. Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not where I thought that would go, but good to know. I mean, it is one of the most interesting performance supplements, I think, in my opinion. So I'm always curious what nutritionists have to say about it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I recommend it often to my clients.
Yeah. So do you get it in like gel form?
I personally just use like diet sodas when I want to use it.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of different forms people can use. Yeah. So you can get it with, sports chews or sports gels or diet sodas, coffee, gum. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways people can get it.
Yeah, I think I've seen like caffeine body wash. If you're too lazy to actually drink a drink.
Not super useful for absorption, but yeah.
As long as you shower before your sporting event, you'll be good. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for joining me. I have several pages of notes with many questions, and I want to try to get more into the details of a couple things rather than the just high level, what is a carbohydrate type stuff,
right.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But before we dive into all of the nuanced stuff, can you just give me your background as a dietitian and your educational background, because I know there's quite a bit there. So tell us your kind of story.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I'm a registered dietitian. I've been one since 2002, so it's been quite a while. I am also a board certified specialist in sports dietetics. I have the International Olympic Committee's diploma in sports nutrition, and I have a master's degree in sports nutrition. So I work with a lot of athletes and active people. And I also work with people in eating disorder recovery, and I'm in private practice. So that's kind of my educational background. And then I'm on a couple of committees as well. On the IFSC, there's a medical subcommittee that's for nutrition. And then I'm also serve on the USA Climbing Medical Committee.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
The Olympic diploma, what is the distinction for that? Because that sounds very specific.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool program, actually. So in order to apply, you have to have a bachelor's degree in a related field. So like nutrition or, athletic performance or something kind of similar. And it's a 2-year like post-grad program. It's actually really awesome. That's actually where I got most of the foundation for my sports nutrition education. They take lecturers like from all over the world, like top researchers that have researched in sports performance and sports nutrition. And you get to access all these top researchers and learn from them. And it's a lot of projects and assignments and things, and a lot of reading and looking at the lectures. But that takes 2 years to get that diploma, so it's kind of a big deal. But it was really fascinating. It was a great program.
Was climbing in the Olympics at the time that you did that program?
No, I did it in I finished in 2017.
Okay.
So no, it wasn't. But since then, it's been added, as we know. And I've actually recorded a couple lectures for them to be a part of their curriculum for the program, so they can have a climbing nutrition component there for future students. So that's been a cool opportunity.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, because I think I heard you mention, I can't remember if this was on our pre-interview or one of the other podcasts I listened to with you, but some of the research you did as part of your master's program was based on climbing nutrition, and that's where you did your first, Yeah. Go ahead. Tell us a little bit about that research.
Yeah, so after I did the IOC diploma, I wanted to roll that into a master's degree. So I did that through the University of Stirling in Scotland, just distance learning because I couldn't go to Scotland because I have a life here. So I just had to basically come up with a research project as my master's degree. So I wanted to do climbing because I had touched on that a little bit through the IOC program, and I felt like there was this big void in the climbing world. Like, we didn't have a lot of climbing research, and specifically climbing nutrition research. There was some on training, there's some on like injury protocols and injury risk and things like that, but not a ton of nutrition. So I just felt like this is my opportunity to contribute, and I'd like to learn more about it. So for my master's degree thesis, my research project was gathering data from adolescent climbers. So I just did that because my son was one at the time. So I just had access to his team, and we looked at their dietary patterns and also looked at their climbing performance, like what grade they could climb, like their climbing ability, and a couple other different things, and just like kind of ran the numbers and looked at it statistically to try to figure out what we could find out. And that was the first study I know of where it was nutrition and also adolescent climbers. And there was an eating disorder component as well. We wanted to discover the prevalence within that team. So that was like my first research project that I did for climbing, and that got published, which was really cool. And since then, so that was, I think it got published in like 2018 or 2019. And since then, there have been a lot more climbing nutrition studies, which is really neat to see it kind of exponentially grow that way. So now we have more information, but still not a lot compared to other sports. Yeah.
Yeah. I got into coaching post 2020, like formally. So my coaching has been during this like dramatic rise in the amount of science that there's been. Because if you go back I think the Olympics must have been what kicked it off, because pre 2020, the number of papers about anything in climbing is very scarce. And I imagine nutrition is the same. So where are we now in 2025 in terms of climbing nutrition science? Is it, obviously there's more papers like we just said, but like, do you feel like we're starting to have enough evidence to make firm decisions about things, or is it still like we're just figuring out how to do the kind of research that we need to do?
Yeah, kind of both in a way. So, like when I've been working with climbers, we know that like the body works similarly across sports. Like we know about energy systems, we know about the Krebs cycle, like we know about substrate usage, things like that. So if you can kind of extrapolate from other sports, you can kind of get there a little bit, or like try to understand like what you might want to start recommending. So for example, like I wrote the first edition of my book, Nutrition for Climbers. Like I was writing that while I was doing the master's program and the IOC program, and then it got published in 2020. And at that point, there wasn't a lot of information on climbing specific nutrition studies, so I had to pull from other sports like Climbing is sort of like a gravitational sport, like gymnastics or something, in the way that you're fighting against gravity. And then it's also sort of a strength sport, but also sort of an endurance sport, depending on what type of climbing you're doing. So you're just kind of like pulling from what you know about how the body works, and also information from other sports to kind of think like, well, if I understand the movement patterns or the like demand on the body, I could probably make an appropriate nutrition recommendation. So that's kind of where I've started from. But since then, we do have a little bit more research. Like we have more research now on what climbers eat. Do they eat enough? And do we know how much energy they expend? And all those have their pros and cons and flaws within the methodology, but at least we're getting a little bit closer to understanding that. But I feel like science is always evolving, and it would be like a strong misstatement to say, yes, we know, like what to tell people for sure in certain situations all the time with, you know, types of climbing. But we can make educated guesses or, you know, estimates, and then also apply that to how the climber does actually perform in real life, you know? So if you're like, oh, I think maybe you might need some more carbs, try this thing, let's try this strategy, implement it, see how it goes. You know, then you can marry like the science with the actual climbing and that lived experience and see what makes sense for them. But yeah. We have a long way to go with climbing nutrition research for sure.
Yeah, it's never done, right? Like it's something that we'll be working on.
It's never done
forever. But if you, I was going to say, if you look at a sport like cycling or like tennis or something, like the research is so advanced and the population sizes are so big compared to the populations that we work with in climbing research.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's like the goal, I guess, is to just get further along that line where you can have, because most of the, I'm not sure if this is just in nutrition science. I was looking at some of those over the weekend, but even the you know, the climbing science research paper, like the study sizes are really vanishingly small in a lot of the
really
papers.
Small.
So it's like when you have 10 papers that say basically the same thing, you can start to make some connections, even if the sample sizes are small. But in general, you know, 50 people is like a pretty small group to make some kind of science off of. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It's interesting that you were talking about other sports and how you use that for your book, because that was something that I touched on in my notes. I know that I'm part of Camp 4 Human Performance with Tyler Nelson and Colin McGee. And like when we talk about science, you know, sometimes we'll be talking about like bouldering movement, and then you can kind of draw from, you know, maybe science and strength and conditioning for the way they train like a baseball player to swing, right? Because it's a very high power specific. But then if you're talking about like a sport climber existing on a wall for a long time, then you have to switch and draw from, you know, maybe something like cycling where you have like critical power and you're looking at the energy systems. There's almost like parts of climbing have to draw from different parts of different sports. Is that kind of what you wound up doing for your book as well?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And that, like, eventually, wouldn't it be cool if we knew specifically about, you know, different types of climbing and what was really optimized? Yeah. Because, I mean, if you think about it, there's so many different types of climbing, like a speed climber versus multi-pitch, or like if you're on a big wall, you know, that's completely different. Yeah. So it's just different nutrition recommendations, drawing from other sports and also drawing from what we know about climbing. Yeah.
Yeah. Big walling to me seems like a nutritional and fueling nightmare. Basically, it's like an insane amount of work. It's like vertical manual labor, basically, in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Amity Warm is awesome about talking about that. She's a sports dietitian as well, and she talks about, you know, hauling up all the gear plus all the food plus all the water and just the logistics of it all, and it's just fascinating. It's a huge challenge to do that.
Yeah. Same with like route setters would be another good example. Like if you talk to someone who's been setting routes for more than maybe 3 to 5 years and they're in good shape, like they don't have a bunch of injuries and stuff like that, the chances that they have their recovery really dialed and their nutrition really dialed and stuff is just super high, because you just can't sustain that kind of output without having a pretty good idea of what you're doing, I think.
Yeah, it's so demanding.
Do you work with some route setters?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that same thing, that it's just basically all the same challenges that climbers have, but just they need more of everything, pretty much?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. They need a lot of food. Yeah. You
had a study that was talking about the percentage of different macronutrients that climbers generally hit. And basically it was like climbers usually come pretty close to hitting their recommendation for protein, and then pretty abysmal for hitting their recommendation for carbs and fats.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is, that protein is the one that we are okay at hitting and we miss on the more energy substrate sides of macronutrients?
I mean, I have thoughts. I don't know if any of this is scientifically true because we just don't know. But I feel like in the athletic world in general, protein is a macronutrient people know about. Like they're like, oh, you need more protein if you're an athlete, and protein is really pushed and marketed toward us, and that could be a reason. I don't really know. And in the past, and even sometimes currently, carbs are sort of demonized, or sometimes people say you need to eat low carb, or maybe you need to eat low carb in order to lose weight, which actually isn't really true. But we get that messaging, and especially if a climber wants to lose weight, they might think that and then try to reduce carbs. So those are my thoughts. Like, I'm not really sure what's going on there. I think if it's the same study that I am thinking of that you're referencing, that was my adolescent study. That was a really small cohort. We only had 22 kids, so it wasn't like a landmark study by any means. But it was interesting to look at what they ate versus what they needed. And I think a lot of it is just like not understanding or knowing that they needed a lot of carbs. And particularly in adolescence, I think it's that they are also really busy. So a lot of these kids would sometimes skip breakfast because they woke up late, and then they would go to school. Sometimes they would have PE, and then they would go right to climbing practice after school, and then they would get home at like 6 or 7 at night. And so it's really hard to fuel if you're not by a kitchen, so they just didn't understand that they need to bring a lot of food with them, or that those foods need to be carbohydrate, in and around training sessions. And then we also looked at their training hours per week. And because some kids were in 2 sports, or some kids also had PE, so some kids were more active than the others. And they, like the more training hours they had per week, the carbohydrates stayed static, which shouldn't be the case. Like they should be eating more carbs as they're more active. And so maybe it's just messaging. Like they might not understand that if you're doing a lot of sports, you need more carbs to cover that. I don't really know, but those are some messages I tried to get out as I've worked with youth climbers and adult climbers.
Yeah, I mean, do you find, obviously, if that study was an adolescent study, I think you're probably right, and I probably should have kept all the citations open in different tabs now that I'm thinking about it. But do you find that that's any different with adult climbers? Because as a coach, that definitely is reflective of the experience that I have talking to climbers about their nutrition, is that they're very focused on protein. Maybe they're focused on total calories and, sometimes some micronutrients and stuff that basically get popular in the news, I feel like is why it's happening. Yeah. But do you find the same thing with adult climbers? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. And they sort of have similar schedules sometimes, especially if they are not, they're not a pro climber. They have their day job, and then they go climbing in the evening or on weekends. Kind of the same thing. It's like, how do you eat enough or fuel enough if you're really busy or stuck in back-to-back meetings or something like that? But I have noticed, I think most of the people that I talk to, most of my clients, know about protein, are really focused on it, own protein powder, use it all the time. And then when I talk with them about how to eat the carbs and how many grams they should be aiming for, usually they're not hitting that, and they're really surprised. They're like, are you sure? I thought I was eating pretty good. But once they add more carbs, they feel a lot better and recover better and perform better. So I think it's just maybe not understanding what they need or how to actually go about it. Yeah.
Maybe that's an area of the science that we need to focus on a little bit more, is education around macronutrients or something like that. Did you present a new paper just recently in Prague? Was that a paper you were presenting there?
No. So it was it was the International Rock Climbing Research Association. They have a conference every 2 years, so I just went to it in Prague a couple weeks ago, and it was a panel of me and then Dr. Lene Jobert and a researcher from Poland, Her name is Anna Schlimskaya. And Anna, if you're listening to this, I apologize because I probably just butchered your name. But we had a panel where we presented on nutrition. There weren't any new papers that we presented on. Dr. Jobert talked about just like the kind of like a bird's eye view of climbing nutrition research currently. And then Anna focused on adolescent climbers, and I focused on relative energy deficiency in sport. So it's just kind of a three-part one. Yeah. Yeah, but we hope to get a paper out of that presentation. So we have this giant Excel spreadsheet with all of the papers that have thus been published, and we want to kind of write a review paper on climbing nutrition with that. So hopefully we can get a manuscript out of that.
Are those three areas, would you say those are like, would those be the main categories that climbing nutrition science is broken into right now?
Yeah, there's been quite a bit on low energy availability and that relative energy deficiency in sport concept, and a little bit on eating disorders, and a little bit just on like climber energy intake versus energy expenditure. Yeah. Okay.
Can you summarize I'm not sure if this makes sense as a question, but can you summarize the research that we have on RED-S and disordered eating and climbing? Like, where is that science at, and what does it tell us?
Yeah, so what we know, if you just want kind of the elevator pitch for it, it's that literally every study that has been published on low energy availability in climbers has shown that climbers aren't eating enough. We don't actually have one single study that's shown climbers are eating enough, like overall calories, and then the macronutrient splits are different, but in general, they're not eating enough. And then if you kind of dive further into it and look at like the methodology design and things like that, it's like, well, can we really determine this definitively? Because, for example, like my adolescent climber study was kind of a pilot study because it didn't have a robust study design because we just wanted to sort of get started and see what we could find. But it was like self-reported dietary intake, which we know is not always super accurate. And there are some studies that also show self-reported dietary intake. So we're like, well, how much stock can we put into that? And then some are more robust where it's like a 7-day food record that's monitored by a dietitian and they measure their food, so that's a little bit more accurate, but still it's sort of a snapshot in time, it's just a week. And so that's kind of the state of the research right now is we're like, well, they're not eating enough, but also, do we know they're not eating enough? But then when you look at it, study after study keeps showing, they're not eating enough, then you start to wonder like, this seems to add up, it seems like they really aren't eating enough. And also I've seen that with my own clients, like just anecdotally. Yeah. So I would tend to say, I think climbers are not eating enough to support their training load, but also there could be improvements in the research or more research done to really support that. Yeah.
I remember seeing this on your blog, on your website. I think it says something like, of all the studies that we've conducted, there's not a single study that shows that climbers are eating enough food. And then I started scrolling through the list of studies that's right below that statement, thinking that there would be like 5 or something, but it just keeps going. It's kind of a shocking number of studies to be able to say authoritatively, like, none of these studies show that climbers are eating enough food. It's it's distressing. It's a distressing message, honestly.
Yeah. And then, as a scientist, you have to examine that. I'm not saying I'm a scientist necessarily, but just like the scientific method has to examine that and be like, well, are the researchers doing something wrong? Could this really be true? But the research methods that they're using are validated and used across a lot of other athletic performance research. So, I think climbers are not eating enough. Yeah.
Am I right though in saying that in general nutrition science, I'm definitely not a scientist and definitely not a nutritionist, but I want to say that I've read somewhere that average people, not climbers, but just normal people, like, underestimate how much they're eating. So they're actually eating more than they think they are. Is that right? That's right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because that would bias the climber thing even further, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And there's, so Anna, the researcher from Poland, actually had one study I'm trying to remember the details. I hope I'm not misquoting it. So she actually, what's useful with the study she did is the the way we find out if they're eating enough or not, or the way we try to discover that is understanding what they're eating, but also understanding their energy expenditure. And most studies just use predictive equations for that, which do have a margin of error, but they are validated. So Anna's study, one of them, she actually put an indirect calorimeter on them. So you put the mask on, and they have to breathe into it, and they measure energy expenditure. So she knew how many calories they needed from that, like their basal metabolic rate. And even that study showed they were under eating. So that we're not kind of discarding it and being like, well, maybe we didn't estimate it right. It's like she actually did estimate it right. And she took a study and compared it with other predictive equations to see is this even accurate, or which predictive equation should we use for climbers. And most of them underestimated climber needs. So that's really interesting too. If you think about that, you're like, oh, well, we were estimating it, but maybe we were even underestimating it. And even then they were still not eating enough.
Yeah. It's believable.
Yeah.
What do you think about apps like Macro Factor? Are you familiar with that app?
I've never used that one. Yeah. What does that do?
Okay. So it's a calorie tracking app, and I've used it, and I've also had clients use it at times. Usually people who are already at a high BMI and ostensibly have a little bit of extra body fat to lose, just to be healthy, not necessarily to climb harder. But the interesting thing about the app is you put in all of your food that you're eating. The same as you would on any other app, although I do think it has a pretty slick interface. But the interesting part is you don't put in any of your activity level. You just put in your weight every day, and then every week the app basically updates, and it's assuming your energy expenditure retroactively just based on what's happening to your weight transiently. And I mean, if you've never used the app, then I'm not sure you have a take on it. But I thought that was a really interesting way to do it, because it seems like it doesn't make any assumptions about, and I've used other ones in the past. It's sort of like you put your weight in and you just tell it yes, I'm very active or extremely active or something. And it just seems really shot in the dark. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah. I've never used it before, but that is interesting. Okay. I wonder, do you know if the app changes its goal for you just based on a couple pounds, or is it more...
Yeah,
because if it's
I think it's just
pounds,
all
that's a normal fluid fluctuation, so it'd be well, do you really need to change anything with that?
It's all body weight based. So every week, I was using it to try to gain weight. And so I had a weight goal, and then every week it would basically say, this week you're going to eat, 22 more calories and 2 more grams of protein and 4 more grams of carbs, or what, that math isn't right. But you know what I mean? It was just make some tiny little adjustment each week to try to nudge you towards the goal. And I think for other reasons, maybe we'll get to them later in the podcast, but just specific to me, it didn't really wind up working as well as I'd hoped. But I have had people find success with it when they're trying to lose 3 to 5 pounds or something like that. But I think it's an interesting strategy, just that it isn't making assumptions about your energy expenditure. And maybe this will be more interesting for you to comment on. But I also, on my phone, there's just so much crap on your phone coming at you all the time. But it has a fitness, a step tracker built into it, and I don't wear a watch or anything like that, so this is just the phone itself. But if I go into the little Fit app on there, it's attempting to plot my energy expenditure, and it's even showing a number of calories. It says you burned however many calories today, and I just think how could it possibly have any opinion about how many calories I'm burning? And isn't this really unproductive to be showing this to people? Because it says 1,700 or something like that, something pretty small, I think, for someone my size and activity level. It seems like damaging information potentially.
I mean, we have all these gadgets at our fingertips, and some of it is not very accurate, especially if you're using a Garmin or an Apple Watch or something like that, where it's telling you your calories burned. Those are not accurate at all. So it is kind of harmful if you think I need to live and die by these numbers, this is what I should be eating, because it's not super accurate. So it can cause harm for sure. People want to really buy into it or structure their eating habits around it when maybe it's not useful information. And I feel that way with
Yeah.
a lot of data. Some athletes are want to be really dialed in and they want all the numbers, and I always want to make sure that we're not doing harm. So if they're like, oh, I want to get my RMR tested and my VO2 max, and I want to go get a DEXA scan, or I wear the Whoop and the Aura ring, or, all these things. Or I want to wear a CGM, and I'm like, okay, but the question is like, what are you going to do with that data,
Yeah.
and how accurate is it for you, and how applicable is it for you? And some of those things can be useful maybe in some situations, but some of them might just not be useful at all or even cause harm. So I'm always really careful with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We can move on.
But I guess it does point to this kind of question about like how much of the practices in climbing that are maybe questionable are cultural things versus intuitive things versus maybe some sort of, maybe there's like built-in human traits. I'm not entirely sure, but let me read another. I pulled a bunch of things out of the studies that I read and some stuff on your website.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I thought this was another thing that was kind of stark that maybe people should hear. So, and I think this was also not a huge sample size, but the study says 46% of males and 38% of female climbers reported intentional weight loss for competition on at least one occasion. Of those, 76% reported utilizing concerning practices, including methods that conform with disordered eating and or eating disorders, dehydration, vomiting, and misuse of laxatives. So that's something like 30% of the climbers overall who are deferring to things like disordered eating to try to lose weight for competition. And then past that, it says intentional weight loss for climbing competition is common, with most athletes achieving 3 to 8% body weight loss over around 2 weeks. So for me, that would be losing 12 pounds in 2 weeks, which is a
ton.
a really frightening amount of weight loss. I found that, even knowing what I know about disordered eating and climbing, I found that a pretty disturbing statistic. So when you do this kind of research and when you see competition climbing, I mean, does it feel like maybe we're not taking this as seriously as we should be? Because this seems urgent to me.
Yeah, that's such a hard question. It's like so many layers and nuances to it. So it's hard because from the research we have, it says body weight is not a key performance indicator. So like you don't need to lose weight in order to climb better, supposedly. But all the research we have looking at, like, they call it anthropometrics. So that's like measurable body characteristics. So like height, weight, ape index. Those like are very little as far as performance. Like they contribute very little or maybe not at all. But then there are also some studies that are like, well, the elite climbers have like lower body fat. But then you're like, well, the elite climbers, like one study showed like female elite climbers, also like 43% of them had disordered eating. So it's like, do they have low body fat and is that helping them climb better? Or is it just kind of like a function of how hard they're training and they're under eating and they happen to climb better in spite of the low body fat?
Yeah.
Or do they have low body fat because they're in an eating disorder? So it's like we kind of know some information, but it's like, well, how do you actually interpret that? So it's hard because you look at all this and you're like, well, it seems like if you are heavier, it'd be easier, or it'd be harder to climb. And it seems like if you're lighter, it'd be easier to climb. And we see those weight practices that you just mentioned. I think that study was by Edward Gibson Smith. He's out of the UK. We're seeing this, and historically just in sports nutrition and sports performance research, sometimes researchers like to look at the practices of athletes because there must be something to it if it's working, and then kind of study that and be like, is this something we should be recommending in the future? So you could think about that with climbing and be like, well, these climbers are losing weight right before competition. Is that helping them climb better? Is this a useful strategy? Because as a sports dietitian, my goal is to ethically and safely help them with any performance strategies they can. So if losing weight is one of them, we should do it. But since we can't draw this bright line between like weight and climbing performance, that's something I usually steer clear of unless it seems really indicated or useful or it's periodized. Because there's a lot of risks that come with weight loss. So that's a really interesting question, and we're still kind of exploring that. Yeah, like, are these weight practices, sure, they're concerning. Like, I don't think it would be useful for anyone to lose, 8% of their body weight 2 weeks before a comp.
Yep.
That's a lot. Are you going to be losing endurance, power, strength? Like, are you at that point depleted of glycogen? Are you dehydrated?
Yeah.
And we do know from some other studies, if you have more disordered eating, your injury risk doubles.
Yeah.
So do you want longevity in sport? Do you want to be injury free? Maybe you should eat more. Yeah, so there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of things to consider with that. Sorry, I just threw a lot at you.
No, I mean, I gave you a very general question. General questions get general answers. I think it's interesting to me because I'm probably 10-ish years into dealing with chronic low energy availability and due to like gastrointestinal issues. And so at this point in my life, I'm in my late 30s. I'm still a high performing athlete. And I would say the way that I would describe what I'm doing in the off season when I'm training is I'm like fighting for my life to try to gain body mass. And it just feels like the most important possible thing that I could be doing for my climbing is to try to increase my especially my lean body mass, but I don't even really care if I just increase the weight on the scale. It's probably a good thing for my climbing. But even as a lighter climber, even 10 years ago, I can think of cases where I was parroting the same sort of things that I had heard other people say around me, like throwing around phrases like fighting weight and like the idea that you would, even if you were skinny, that you would still want to lose weight if you were trying to send your project. 10 years ago, I was probably I'm 5'10", and I was probably 145, 148 pounds, something like that. And I still culturally thought that I should be trying to lose weight from there if I was trying to climb my hardest route, which is, looking back, like crazy toxic. Yeah. I mean, now I'm like 153, 155, and I really do feel like if I could get the weight on the scale to like 160 or 165, I would probably feel better. I don't notice any negative thing about my climb. I can't tell you a single negative thing about my climbing at this weight compared to being 10 pounds lighter. I just feel stronger and more powerful and better than I did 10 years ago. Basically in every way. So I'm not sure how I can feel that way, and culturally we can think that the opposite is somehow true.
Yeah. And if you can put on weight and it's muscle weight, that will help you with climbing, And, and there's other like health considerations too. Like if you're too low body fat, then you have, health risks and health concerns there, and too low body weight in general. Yeah. So yeah, I agree. I feel like the message is shifting. I feel like a lot of people have now heard about relative energy deficiency in sport, and I feel like the awareness is raised about disordered eating. So I think that's awesome. But I think we still have a long way to go as to, getting the message out that you don't have to be super thin to climb well, or to just like not have that be a part of the culture anymore.
Yeah. I think it's like it feels like just putting nitrous in your car. Like if you could run your car on just nitrous and no actual fuel, it's like it's going to go really fast down the block, and then it runs out of gas, and you have to done. That's it. It's like it's just a very one-dimensional strategy for athletic progression. And I want to go back and ask some questions about something you mentioned about anthropometrics, and it wasn't just anthropometrics. I think it was just general body size. Like you mentioned that we have some science that shows that as long as you're within the healthy range, it doesn't affect your climbing. And I feel like, I don't know if this is just that cultural predilection towards, or predisposition towards being lighter, but I feel like a lot of people are going to hear that. And even though they're hearing a prominent, well-educated researcher saying it, they're still going to balk at it. And I'm curious, can you just explain what that means or how that science was done? I'm just curious to hear how you think that works.
Yeah. So we have a chunk of research studies that look at, like, basically researchers tried to discover, can we, like, look at climbers' physical characteristics and can that predict climbing performance? Or are there certain physical characteristics that seem relevant to climbing performance? Mm-hmm. So the studies vary on how they achieved this. Like, so some studies are like, let's just have them do, like, what are their pull-ups and what's their bent arm hang, and they maybe run them through, like, a battery of tests. Like, one of them had them do, like, an arm crank test that looks like an bicycle pedals, but you're cranking with your arm, or, you know, stuff like that. And then they measure, like, body fat percentage and height and weight and ape index and things like this. And they're just like, I don't know, like, can we draw any statistical correlations or causations between what we can observe with this climber and their climbing ability? And it's kind of a mixed bag, but if you look at the whole in general, it's kind of like the anthropometrics didn't really matter for climbing ability. But then if you also look at the whole, all of these climbers were at totally inappropriate body weight. So it's like, and some were actually too thin, but, like, none of them were overweight. So It's like, what do we know from that? All we know is what the science actually says, which is, like, if you take this climber and this is their physical characteristics, this is their climbing ability. And that's kind of, like, all we know. We're like, great. Yeah. So it just doesn't seem to be any correlation at this point. But also, we don't have any, like, controlled studies. So, like, the gold standard is, like, can you make a control group and an intervention group and compare the outcomes there? So, like, we don't have any studies where we're like, oh, they took a group of climbers that were, like, 25 pounds, quote unquote, overweight, whatever that means, and did we have them lose weight? And then did we have a control group that had no intervention and compare their performance?
Right.
So we don't have anything like that. We just have, like, anecdotes of people being like, I lost weight and I climbed better,
Yeah.
Which is valid and could be true that if you lose weight, you could climb better. But
it's that nitrous thing. Like, if you put nitrous in the car and take it down the block, it still gets down the block. So you see some positive return. It's just not not like a repeatable.
For how long does that last? And is that sustainable? And is that even healthy for you? Or are you missing out on other gains? Did you lose lean mass in the process? Things like that. So
pick up an injury.
I mean, I'm trying to, I hope I'm representing the science accurately, like, and that makes sense, where it's just like, we have this group and we know that they were an appropriate weight and weight didn't seem to matter.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm always picking at this on every podcast and on my Instagram and stuff like that. But I think one core problem with that type of research, and this isn't, I don't think that the message of the research is wrong before I launch into my tirade here. But I think the problem is that climbing ability, unlike with a lot of other sports, is just really, really hard to represent in something that goes on one side of a graph. So, like, when you say that anthropometrics doesn't affect climbing ability, it's like basically you're taking height and plotting it against climbing ability, or you're taking ape index and plotting it against climbing ability and not seeing, like, much of a clear trend for any of those things. But, it's not like plotting those things against how far you can jump or, like, how much weight you can squat or something like that, where you're, they're just those are just much more predictable. They're the same in every country and in every universe and on every, whereas with climbing grade, especially if it's self-reported, like, it's just a very abstract concept. So you know what I'm saying? Like,
researchers try to control for that. Like, most of the researchers try to control for that by saying, like, what's your best red point grade, or like the International Rock Climbing Research Association has kind of this graph where it kind of unifies all the grades. So, like, if you're saying, oh, I can climb like a 511 B, and someone's like, well, I do a 9A, like, there's all these different measures of climbing grades. So, like, the IRCRA, like, unifies that into, like, a numerical system. So they're trying to control for that on some level, because if you say, like, well, what's your climbing ability? You're like, well, the best I've ever done on this one day where everything was perfect.
Yeah.
I did this. So they try to control for that by being like, well, what's your best red point, or something like that. Yeah. But to your point, like, that's also muddied, all kind of similar to self-reported dietary intake, like, you're asking people what they eat. You're also asking people how well they climb.
It's going to be, and it's not even just that it's a abstract thing from the get-go. It's also going to be differently reported by individuals because some people, if you say, what's your highest red point grade, they're automatically going to be very humble and reluctant, and they're going to step down quite a bit from what they're actually capable of just because they question themselves and they're not that type of athlete. Whereas some other people are going to take like the one that they almost did one time and they're going to be like, yeah, I can like do that, you know, because they're just more confident about their abilities.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's a problem with the science. I think that's just something that makes climbing and climbing science like extra complicated to try to yeah. Well, and I'll give you
it's a known thing. Like if you're a track athlete, you know exactly how fast you can do the 100-meter.
Yes.
But with climbing, it's a little squishy. Yeah.
Well, you go from
and then your grades are like different. Like, you know, how gradings are subjective.
Yeah.
Like reps are subjective.
If you run a 100-meter in Washington and then you run a 100-meter in Alaska, they're probably not going to be that different. You know, maybe if you run one
at like elevation, but
high elevation is the only thing. You know, and that's also a factor in climbing. But what I was thinking is like, if you take a climber in actually Colorado is a great example, like a boulderer in Colorado, and you run this comparison of like height and weight and ape index to climbing grade on boulders in Colorado. And then you take the same sample size and you have all those people go to South Africa for a few months and you run that comparison in South Africa. Like height and ape index are going to make a way bigger difference in South Africa just because you tend to have better holds and they tend to be farther apart there. So it's almost like the science even compared to other sports, the science has to be done in like way bigger populations that have like a way broader range of climbing styles that they're exposed to. Otherwise, those individual characteristics of the types of climbing are going to like mess with the science. It seems like to me.
Yeah. So that's why, again, like to your point, like it's kind of still in its infancy, right? Like you're kind of like, what's the state of science? And I'm like, well, we're trying to learn things, but we don't know a lot. But this is kind of what we know so far, or think we know. Yeah.
I think maybe the takeaway message for people is to understand it's still a general. It's still a general message, but the general message is pretty well understood that those things, all other things being equal, and taking climbing skill as a very vague term, like body size and other anthropometrics don't seem to make a huge impact as long as you're within like normal, healthy metrics. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Definitely.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think that's another important message for people, honestly. Okay.
Yeah, and like I've had a couple, you know, clients over the years that have been like, well, I think I need to lose 5 pounds because when I gain 5 pounds, I can't do a pull-up anymore. And then I'm like, well, then you just need to get stronger. Like 5 pounds should not phase you, you know, like that's not a lot of weight, you know. So if you're so focused on weight that you're losing power and muscle mass when it's just, I don't know. I'm just like, how about you optimize yourself? Like a well-fueled athlete is a well-performing athlete. So optimize that feeling.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a classic case of loss aversion. Like we're very opposed to losing things, and we really focus on that. So the idea of like losing the ability to do a pull-up is something that we're like really, really obsessed with. But the idea that you could gain 5 pounds and gain the ability to do more pull-ups or more pulling power, like we don't think about that as much.
Yeah.
So I think where we were before we got interrupted again is strategies for different disciplines is the next thing I was going to ask. So we were talking about 2 or 3 hour bouldering sessions, and I guess this is just a quick anecdote. So recently I've been doing more sport climbing this summer, and I've been going up to a crag that has a pretty hefty approach, like a couple thousand feet of elevation gain. And this is also after I drive to the other side of the mountains, so it makes for a big day. And I didn't know the first time I went there. I was told that the approach, I was given like a window where it's like it was between this crag and this crag in terms of difficulty, and I didn't know what that meant, but it turned out that it's like an hour uphill. And thankfully I always bring a lot of food, so I had food, but I was really surprised how quickly I got tired that day. I think because I didn't front load enough calories basically right before and right after that hike, because an hour uphill hiking is like pretty legit with a rope and stuff. So yeah, how do you think about just varying the nutrition input based on the activity level. I know that there's general energy expenditure and we can kind of think about our, training load and stuff like that and be
Hmm.
consistent. But, if you have these spikes, does intuitive eating manage that, or do you have any sort of system for thinking about like how much food to add? Basically, when people are doing different disciplines of climbing, how do they make sure that they are eating enough, if
Hmm.
that's the main advice?
Yeah, you're thinking about the workload. So just like you were describing, like you're thinking about the workload of like how long is the approach? Is it huge elevation gain? How much gear am I carrying? And that's just one part of your climbing day. Dr. Louise Burke, she's this really prolific researcher. She's really well known in the sports nutrition community. So she coined this phrase, fuel for the work required, which I love because it just makes so much sense. You're like,
Hmm.
I'm going to fuel for whatever work I'm asking my body to do. So if my work is a 45-hour kind of chill session in the gym, or sorry, 45-minute, that's going to be really different than what you just described.
Hmm.
So you're trying to just like kind of match your fueling to whatever you're asking your body to do. So the longer you go and the more intense you go, the more carbohydrate your body's going to need and the more overall energy your body is going to need.
That
So you
makes
just try
sense.
to account for that. Yeah. So it's like if you know there's going to be a long approach and a really long climbing day, you're like, I'm going to bring plenty of food. I'm going to eat every 45 minutes to every hour. I'm going to make sure that I'm getting ahead of the bonk, rather than realizing, oh my gosh, I'm weak, I'm shaky, I'm hungry, I'm fatigued, I'm dizzy, whatever it is. And you're like, oh, well, now I have to catch up. Like you're trying to prevent that and stay ahead of it so that
Yeah.
you're always feeling energized throughout the whole thing as much as possible.
Yeah. In that case, I got kind of blindsided the first time that I went there, and then subsequent trips to that same place usually get to the crag at like 10:30 or something. And what I've been doing now is like I just get there and I just immediately start eating some of my lunch
Yeah,
because in
totally.
order to drive there, I have to eat breakfast pretty early, so it's already been a good chunk of time anyway. But I just
Hmm.
like get to the crag and sit down and just start eating my lunch before I even do like a warm
Yeah,
up route, basically,
yeah,
and consider that like recovery from the hike. Maybe if I was a better
yeah,
hiker,
yeah,
it would
yeah,
be
yeah. And
less
you're
of
setting
that.
yourself up for the climb. Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, so one related question to that, I feel like I talk to climbers all the time who ask me about making sure they're getting enough food. And really the problem is it's not that they have disordered eating or a bad relationship with food. It's just that when they go climbing, they're very focused on the task at hand. They're trying to like
Hmm.
solve the boulder or they're like up on the rope. And then when they come down, they're belaying their friend and they're not
Hmm.
making time to eat, which I think that is the solution basically is you have to make time to eat. But do you have any recommendations for those people? Because I feel like that's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. I think one of the things that could help is shifting your mindset around it. So, like, our mindset is like, okay, we need to figure out gear, we need to manage gear, we need to do safety checks, we need
Hmm.
to figure out the beta. Like there are all these things that are steps to climbing. And one of the essential steps should be we also fueling and we're
Yeah.
also hydrating with it. So shifting your mindset from like, this is optional or an afterthought to like, this is part of the focus of climbing. Like this is just what happens when I climb is I'm going to eat and I'm going to drink. And then another thing you can do is just kind of build it into the natural rhythm of climbing.
Hmm.
So like often you're switching off belay partners. So that's a little bit of downtime. Could you eat then? Could you eat while you're flaking the rope? Could you eat while you're going from one route to the next? Like just trying to figure out like trying to build it into that natural rhythm so it seems normal and natural for you, it's kind of regularly timed. And
Hmm.
sometimes people do have to set a timer on the phone. I do recommend that often, because sometimes they're just like not thinking about it and they're like, I don't know, I'm so focused on climbing, or I didn't realize I was now getting really fatigued and I should have eaten earlier. And so sometimes it's just being really practical about it, like setting a reminder on your watch or your phone or whatever you have. Those are some ideas, but I think just the mindset shift would be helpful, where you're just like, oh, this is a part of climbing. This needs to happen, just like flaking my rope needs to happen, or just like my safety checks are happening.
Yeah. That's a really smart way to think about it. Like I live in central Washington, so I'm driving a lot of the time to Western Washington to go climbing this time of year because it's cooler there. And like I wouldn't leave my house to do several hours of driving without being sure that I have enough gas in my truck.
Exactly.
So it
Yeah.
doesn't really make any sense to go on a climbing day and not make sure that you have enough fuel in your body. I guess there's
Yeah.
just for some reason that's like a tough
It's
Tough,
like an afterthought.
yeah,
Yeah,
tough
yeah.
gap to bridge for
Yeah,
some
and
people.
that can be a real safety issue. Like if you're in the backcountry and you're climbing and you get dehydrated or you have low blood sugar, like um that is a safety issue. Like your mind isn't as sharp. You could miss a key, not you could miss a safety check. You
Yeah.
could just be kind of sloppy and that can lead to injury or death. Like it's not something to mess around with.
Yeah, that's a good point, and doesn't even have to be in the backcountry, actually. Like, it doesn't even have to
Mm-hmm.
be types of climbing that involve ropes. I think that
Yeah.
underfueling and dehydration are should be considered risks to any healthy climber who's trying to maintain
Yeah.
a training
Yeah.
schedule. Like,
Yeah.
that's totally a very practical source of injury
Yeah.
is insufficient fueling or dehydration. And I'm glad you brought up dehydration because that's the other thing that I really struggle with at that type of crag, especially because you do the hike in the sun and then you get to the wall and the wall is in the shade. So I'm having a very hard time getting to the wall without having been sweating for the last, 30
Yeah.
minutes or something going up this talus field. Um, and I personally have a really hard time like keeping enough electrolytes in the system when I'm doing something like that. I think it's just part of my makeup. And so like the first day I was at that crag, basically two pitches in, second pitch, like my forearms, like my brachioradialis muscle was just like cramping and I could flex my arm, but I couldn't extend it, which makes like clipping, I was like leading and I was like, well,
Right.
I just can't lead anymore because this is really sketchy. I'm gonna like blow a clip or something. So the rest of my climbing day was basically kind of ruined because I didn't have electrolytes with me. So, other than bringing electrolytes with you, if you think that that kind of thing's going to happen, what do you think about usage of extra electrolytes? Can we get enough from food? Should people have them on hand? Is it individual, or how do you think about that?
It's really individualized. So it depends on a lot of different factors. One is your individual sweat rate, like how
Hmm.
much fluid are you losing? And then one is the individual sodium loss. So, like how much sodium are you losing in your sweat, which is really individual and usually just genetic. So, like some people only lose maybe a couple hundred milligrams per hour when they're sweating, and some people lose over 1,000.
Hmm.
So, there's this huge range. So, you just kind of have to learn for yourself what that means. And there's various ways to test it. You can work with a sports dietitian and figure that out. But if you're a really salty sweater, you'll know it. Like you'll have like salt crusties on your face or on your clothes, or when you sweat and the sweat evaporates, you have like that gritty substance.
Hmm.
That's me. So I have to have like tons of sodium or I get headaches and I get very fatigued and I have really poor recovery.
Hmm.
And some people don't really need a lot of salt and they're totally fine just drinking water and maybe eating some pretzels. So you can definitely get electrolytes from food. But if you're an incredibly salty sweater, you'll need to replenish with like a formal electrolyte drink. I
Okay.
just stick extra salt in my Gatorade. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, you
Okay.
don't have to do anything fancy or expensive. But yeah, it's good to understand your sweat rate and also sodium losses. But that also depends on altitude and weather. Is it hot? Is it humid? Is humid? Is it very cold? Or are you like in really extreme conditions? Like, is it windy or just something you're not used to? Like maybe you live at sea level and you traveled to altitude to climb. So there's a ton of variables there, but in general, just like drinking regularly, just like you're eating regularly. So you're drinking like every 20 to 30 minutes, you're sipping on something.
Yeah.
If electrolytes help you, that's awesome. Usually people drink something flavored more than they would drink just plain water. So electrolytes can help just function as something to make you drink. So those are some scenarios to consider.
Okay. Yeah, two things I remember from I was a Boy Scout for whatever that's worth. I don't know if that's
Nice.
embarrassing, but two things I remember are number one, like don't wait until you're thirsty. It's like too late once you're thirsty. And then number two, never ration water, even if you have a limited amount of it. If
Mm-hmm.
you're like in a like any kind of survival situation. And so my attitude is just to like try to drink my water every time I think about it, basically. And
Mm-hmm.
on this salty sweater thing, I just had this memory that popped into mind of being in the backcountry in California. I was like backpack bouldering and like waking up in the middle of the night. I was just cowboy camping like on my crash
Mm-hmm.
pad, and I woke up in the middle of the night because I was in my sleeping bag, but I had taken my clothes off and left them on the pad, and I woke up to this weird sound and like looked over, and there was a deer just like licking my
Uh,
shirt that I had hiked in. And I scared the crap out of the deer. I don't know that he knew that I was there, but he was just trying to get the salt off of my shirt. So maybe I am a salty.
so maybe you're a salty
Yeah,
sweater.
good to know. What do you think about the other electrolytes like potassium and magnesium, is just any electrolyte supplement good enough, or do they vary at all? Do the needs vary between people?
Yeah, they vary. So potassium and the other ones are like less relevant as far as rehydration or adequate hydration and also cramping prevention. So it's mostly sodium that you're looking for.
Hmm.
The other electrolytes are less important, not as crucial because you don't lose as much in your sweat losses.
Hmm.
Those are retained a little bit better in your body.
Okay.
And those can be gotten from food as well. But yeah, sodium is the main one you're looking for. And most electrolyte drinks, the products like vary widely in the sodium content, and usually the potassium and magnesium are kind of similar between them.
Gotcha. I feel like I see the all the electrolyte brands saying that it makes you recover faster. And I mean, they want you to drink one every day, no matter whether you do
Yeah,
anything or
it's like
not.
such a big marketing push right now. It's so weird. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like most people in general don't really need electrolytes, but if you're active and you're climbing or you're working out and you're sweating a lot, then you'll need electrolytes. So that would be the situation. You don't need to drink them all day long just for the heck of it. Then you're just getting a lot of extra salt in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like just like yesterday I did it's 100 degrees here right now and I went to Planet Fitness and did the Stairmaster and it's not 100 degrees in Planet Fitness, but it's still like pretty hot in there. And
Hmm.
I came home and I just like ate a very salty dinner because I was
Yeah.
home and eating. And so I was like, well, I can probably just drink water and salt my food, and
Yeah,
that seems fine.
definitely.
That's obviously not as convenient in the backcountry where like electrolytes
Right.
maybe make more sense. Okay, yeah,
Right. Yeah.
cool. I guess last thing I want to ask you about while we're on the like fueling subject would be gut health, and I know that's its own 10 hours of podcasting.
Yeah.
But is there anything you want to say to climbers in general about taking care of their gut? I mean, we're telling people to eat more. I know for me that advice has been valuable at times, but also has caused me other problems because of my personal GI. So should climbers think about gut health? Is that a concern? Is there anything they should be aware of? Very
In
broad
general,
question, I
gut
know.
health, I mean, it's like, yeah, it is a loaded question because it's so complex and like, what does that really mean, gut health? But
Yeah.
in general, if you're under fueling, your gut health may suffer
Hmm.
because the gut is an active organ. It has a lot of cell tissue turnover and it needs energy to function.
Hmm.
So lots of times I have athletes, not just climbers, that come to me with gut issues. And I'm like, well, let's at least first make sure you're adequately fueled, and that might resolve the problem, which
Hmm.
sometimes it actually does. So maybe it's not something complex. Maybe it's not that you have an underlying disease. Maybe it's just that you're underfed, and the gut
Interesting.
needs some nourishment. And then beyond that, it would be like more like complex foods, like less processed foods are better for your gut. So if you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, a lot of whole grains, nuts and seeds, beans and legumes and lentils and things like that, those are really healthy for your gut. Your gut likes those and it keeps your gut happy, and it usually keeps your bowels pretty regular. So that's like just kind of generic, like general gut health.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if someone is struggling with a lot of different issues or symptoms, that should definitely be looked at, and just and go to your doctor or a gastroenterologist and go to a GI dietitian and see if there's an underlying disease state you need to uncover, or what kind of personalized nutrition advice you might need to manage those symptoms or to help your gut recover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's good. That's good general advice. And I mean, fiber, I feel like if I had to stratify it, it's like in the maybe 20 to 50 crowd, it's like all about protein. And then once you start
Yeah.
talking to people who are like 50 and up, it's like they just talk
Yeah.
about fiber all the time.
Yeah.
Protein's maybe increasingly popular in that group too. But yeah, I think that is a good general set of things to think about. So yeah. Are there any, I mean, obviously GI distress would be something people should be aware of. Are there any other like warning signs that people should think about when it comes to that?
Yeah, like if you're having issues with general digestion where you're like, you can divide it into upper GI and lower GI. So like upper GI would be like, are you feeling nauseated a lot? Do you have heartburn? Do you have a lot of acid reflux? And then lower GI would be like, do you have cramping or bloating with meals or with certain foods? Or do you have a
Hmm.
change in stool consistency or urgency or frequency? So you're just looking at those and feeling like if something feels off, what might be going on? Maybe I need to go get a professional opinion here
Yeah.
to make sure that I'm okay. Yeah.
There's a crazy stigma about that, and I know I personally ignored some things that I should have paid attention to for way too long just because I was
Mm-hmm.
like, a guy in my 20s, and so I was like, that's fine. Like I'm not gonna, nobody talks about this stuff, so I'm not
Yeah.
gonna like make a big deal out of it. And yeah, I try not to have regrets, but I probably should have listened to some of those signals and like talked to professionals sooner. So I think it's like a if you even think maybe that it's something you should think about, you should probably think
Yeah.
about it.
I mean, yeah, there are definitely like serious bowel issues that if they go undiagnosed, that could lead to a lot of problems. Like if you have celiac disease or if you have Crohn's disease or, colon cancer, like you would want to know that. Like you want to assess
Yeah.
that and get that diagnosed and treated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, my last thought on the gut health thing was you mentioned that it requires energy. It's an energetic process or a process that requires energy. And
Mm-hmm.
that just reminded me of like I read Steve Jobs' biography by Walter Isaacson like a whole bunch of years whenever it came out, I don't know, 10 plus years ago. And there's this story in there about Steve Jobs like being very neurotic about his diet and just he would only eat apples for days or weeks and he would only eat carrots for days or weeks and he would do these really long fasts and he talked about how it gave him like tremendous focus because digesting was really tiring and I read that and I was like what does that even mean? How can digesting be tiring? And I did some water fasts for the first time in my life and this was over 10 years ago. I'm not recommending water fasting to anybody necessarily, but I was really shocked when you stop putting food into the system. You do feel like some type of energy just because your body's not doing this quite laborious process that it has to do in order to have energy for later. So it's
Yeah.
obviously not sustainable. But yeah, if you do a fast for a day or two, you sort of realize like, whoa, yeah, digesting is like hard work that my body's doing in the background. It's very
It
interesting.
is hard work. You need to feel your gut. But
Yeah.
yeah, like yeah, I'm not recommending fasting or water
No.
fast or anything like that. But yeah, like your gut needs energy to do its thing, but
Hmm.
that's how your body gets energy. It
Yeah.
absorbs through the gut. So you need an optimal gut there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an
Yeah.
interesting mechanical process. A
Yeah.
lot of work going on down there. Okay, so let's pivot into one of your areas of expertise, which is disordered eating.
Mhm.
Um, and obviously, this is a bit of a touchy subject in some circles in the climbing world. And we've already covered the general advice of people need to make sure that they're eating enough. What do you think the sources are of the problem that climbing has with disordered eating? Is it a body image thing, performance thing, come from multiple angles?
Yeah, that is such a good question. I always like to speak on the research if we have it, and we don't
Hmm.
have research as to like the origins of disordered eating and climbing. So I've seen anecdotes, I've seen articles and blogs, and we've heard podcasts of people talking about it. And it seems like it's sort of a combination of a lot of things. I think one is body image. I've seen that with a lot of my clients. And some of that is related to body image tied into the identity of a climber. So
Hmm.
if you identify yourself as a climber and that's part of your strong identity, some people express that they want to look the part or they feel like they need to look the part of a climber, whatever that means to them. So usually to them that would mean like I need to be thin or I need to be, really, really strong but thin. So I've seen that play a role in some of my clients where they feel like I need to look the part. Um, and they are fearful of gaining weight. And I think some of it might be that idea that you need to be lighter in order to be a better climber. It's just physics. You're thinking about how can I get better at the sport? Maybe if I lose weight, I can improve. So those are the two things that come off the top of my head. Yeah.
Hmm.
What have you seen? Do you notice anything?
I think that's probably a pretty good summary. And maybe this is the demographic that I work with the most often as a coach. I would say my core demo is like late 20s through late 30s, maybe, and often like
Mm-hmm.
busier people who have a kid and or multiple kids or something like that. And I think a lot of the time those people don't struggle with it quite as much, partly because they just have other things in their life. They're not as wrapped up in their climbing performance. And I think a lot of people who get sucked down into that kind of wormhole is like maybe people who are their climbing performance is the number one thing in their
Hmm.
life, and so they're willing to like sacrifice a lot more for it. But if you have a job and maybe two kids you're taking care of and climbing is something you're doing on the side, maybe it's a little bit easier not to get so wrapped up in it. I'm not sure. That's a guess, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But it would make sense if you think about like where it's the most prolific, which is probably in the competition world and in the like cutting edge performance world, which are two worlds
Hmm.
where most of the people participating are going to have like a much more like core identity, or climbing is
Yeah.
going to be a much
They're
more
really
core part of
invested in
their
it. Hmm.
identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, most of the most powerful things that we can do with either valence, positive or negative, are going to be things that are a result of us identifying really strongly with whatever it is that we're trying to do. And
Hmm.
athletes are famously unreasonable
Yeah.
people. So when it comes to thinking about disordered eating, what are some signs that people should be aware of when it comes to both themselves, which might be a little bit tricky because of self-delusion, but also their partners? And obviously, then you have to think about how they would talk to their partners. But let's just start with noticing it. Like, what should we be looking for? What are the concerns?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lengthy list, and there's a lot of different types of disordered eating and eating
Hmm.
disorders. But a few just general ones are like feeling a lot of anxiety or guilt around food, feeling like you're not quite sure what to eat or how much to eat, or you make food rules around food that if you then break, you feel a lot of guilt or anxiety. Another one would be skipping meals or slowly eliminating food groups or types of foods. So someone might start out with like a wide variety of foods in their diet, and as an eating disorder progresses, they slowly decide that certain foods are no longer acceptable, and eventually they have a very narrow list of foods they're able to eat.
Mm.
Another sign is if it really interferes with your life, more so than it seems like it should. So you might have had a good relationship with food and been able to be flexible when traveling and eat different foods, or when you're going out with friends or whatever. And then as an eating disorder progresses, you're narrow and narrow in your food choices. So then you start getting your life is a little bit smaller and smaller. Like you start skipping social occasions, or you don't want to travel, or you don't even necessarily want to go climb where you don't know what the food situation might be. And it just makes you kind of miss out on things that you would have otherwise because of your food rules or choices. And then there's physical signs and symptoms. So, like weight loss or weight gain can both happen depending on what the eating disorder is, if it's restrictive versus if it's binging.
Hmm.
Usually, gut issues do occur with eating disorders just because food is disrupted and it's not as regular for your intake. So then your bowels are simultaneously disrupted. You can have fatigue, and then there are other signs that you wouldn't necessarily know unless you're testing for it, like maybe anemia or low thyroid, blood sugar regulation gets out of whack. Um, if it's extreme restriction, people start losing weight. Sometimes they start losing their hair. They're very, very fatigued. Their heart rate downregulates, so their resting heart rate is lowered. But then it shoots up when they even try to just stand up or sit up.
Mm.
So those are a few, but there's a lot more depending on what's going on with the person, how severe it is, what type it is, and how long it's been going on.
Yeah. Yeah, just like with something that I do run into a lot in my coaching, and I have researched a lot, which is overtraining. It's like has this long list of
Yeah,
symptoms.
yeah.
And then the one that I feel like usually is the thing that actually gets people to start paying attention to it is when your performance starts to suffer. And
Hmm.
I think that that has to be what's so insidious about eating disorders is you can go a long ways in some cases before your performance actually starts to really decline, which says a
Hmm.
lot about how cool climbing is, that it's such a technical and mental sport, right? But it's also it can really make that particular form of disease pretty devastating in some cases.
Yeah, yeah. The more intense and prolonged it is, the harder the recovery process, and sometimes the body does not fully recover or restore. There
Hmm.
can be permanent damage from it. So yeah, it's not something to be taken lightly for sure.
Yeah, it almost reminds me a little bit of like addiction, where accepting that there's a problem that needs to be dealt with feels like a pretty crucial first
Yeah,
step.
yeah. Yeah, there are lots of people that are struggling with disordered eating and don't know it or don't realize it or think that they're functioning normally.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
And
that's
I,
hard.
I know you work with a lot of people who have these sort of issues. Do they usually
Mhm.
come to you knowing that they have an issue, or is it something that needs to be explored and then you kind of decide how to move forward?
Yeah, usually they come to me, they're like, something's off, I think I have a problem, or they've seen a doctor and the doctor has referred them to me because the doctor has diagnosed them with that. I often work with a lot of teen and adolescent clients as well. So lots of times it's the parent coming to me saying there's something wrong,
Mm,
and then I work with them that way. There have only been probably a couple of times where someone came to me just wanting to optimize their nutrition or performance. And the more we talk, the more I'm like, oh, like you have an eating disorder.
hmm.
Usually people are aware of it when they're setting the appointment with me, and that's why they want to work with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess if you were like deep into the kind of self-deception phase of it, it could be easy to convince yourself that nothing was wrong. And they're probably, your eating disorder in that case would probably be like, yeah, don't go see that person because that person is going to tell you that I am the problem, I being the,
Yeah.
the eating disorder. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about for partners, and that could be climbing partners or I guess also life partners? Um, how do we actually let me just ask a patron question, which is close to what I was about to say.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is from Brianna. She said, tips for a coach having a conversation with a climber about the climber's disordered eating. I feel like it would be easy for a climber to feel guilty, and I just want to express concern and care, not make them feel bad or feel like I blame them for where they're at. Any phrases you find particularly useful? And I'll just add to that because it's not enough as it is. Um, the coach climber might be one relationship, but what about for just a climber and their climbing partner or for, a life partner? Like, would you handle those things differently? And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the coach climber is a good relationship scenario because it's tricky because the coach has some authority over the climber in a way.
Hmm.
They're seen as an authority figure. But the coach also has responsibility to keep the climber safe.
Hmm.
So, like ethically, if the coach is seeing something that seems off, they do need to talk with the climber about that, because the climber may not be safe to train or compete.
Hmm.
So that's something that coaches need to be aware of. So, as a coach, I would recommend staying in your scope of practice. So your goal is not to then treat them nutritionally. Your goal is to stay within your scope as a coach, identify if there's anything wrong, pull them from play if needed. If you're a coach that does any kind of work on a competition level, with comp climbers, hopefully you've gone through safe sport training.
Hmm.
And safe sport, like a violation of safe sport is you're putting an injured player back into play. An eating disorder is a metabolic injury. It's not a visual injury that we can see, but it's a metabolic injury. And I think it's a violation of safe sport to put that person back in.
Yeah,
Like
that's
they
a
should not
great
be training, they should not be competing, if it's not safe.
That's
So
just
if you're,
such a good point. Not to interrupt you, but
yeah,
I mean, I feel
yeah,
like we've all seen climbers in the competition circuit where we're wondering, and that's
mm-hmm,
always what I'm wondering. I didn't have those words for it, but I basically look at some of those climbers and I'm like, I feel like this
yeah,
person's basically out there climbing with a grievous
yeah,
injury.
yeah. Is this even ethical? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to follow the rules of ethics and keep the climber safe. That's our one responsibility as a coach, keep the climber safe. So if you're concerned, this is what you can do. You say, I'm observing this. So you approach with care and compassion and fact. So you're
Hmm.
not assuming they have an eating disorder because we don't really know.
Hmm.
And that's out of our scope to diagnose. It's out of my scope to diagnose. Um, and so you just observe. I noticed you skipped dinner when we all went out as a team. Tell me what's going on.
Hmm.
Are you comfortable sharing that? Or I'm noticing that you're skipping snacks, or I'm noticing you're very fatigued. Tell me what's going on. Is there a way we can help you? And if they respond to you negatively, like, no, everything's fine, you just keep observing, you keep talking with them. But at some point, you may have to be like, I'm concerned about your performance. You don't look well. You need to go see a physician, get a full physical clearance before you come back to practice next.
Okay.
So the coach can kind of have that in the back pocket ready to go. Like, I observed this. I'm concerned about you. Are you okay? Go see a doctor, please.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
I don't know if you know that you're doing this. Maybe it's something you have, uh, maybe it's in your education somewhere, but I remember in my study of communications and some communications books I've read, they always put the hierarchy as observations, thoughts, feelings, and needs. And you always
Okay.
want to start with an observation. And if you're going to progress down the line, that's fine. But one
Mm-hmm.
mistake you could make would be like jumping straight to the need, which in this case would be, I need you to go see a doctor, without
Mm-hmm.
first establishing the chain of events, basically, that's a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
compassionate way to communicate with someone, something
Yeah,
complicated.
yeah. And we do never know what's going on. Like if they're skipping meals, is there food insecurity at home? And that's what's
Hmm.
going on. Maybe they don't have the budget for food or, it might not really be an eating disorder, it might be something else. So we just want
Yeah.
to observe first, observe with neutrality, but also care, you
Yeah.
know. And the same could go with a climber. So if it's not a coach, but it's like a climbing buddy or,
Yeah.
a loved one or a friend, oh, I noticed this about you around your food. I'm really curious. Can you tell me more about this?
Hmm.
And just noting that you're there for them and also maybe they're willing to open up. And if they're not, just keep being there for them and supporting them. It depends on your relationship and your rapport with that person, but hopefully it would be comfortable enough to be like, I'm concerned that you might have some disordered eating. I know of this resource in the community. Would you be willing to go see them?
Yeah.
If it's a parent, that's something different. A parent over a child would be like, hey, something's wrong. We're going now,
Yeah. Yeah. You have
Yeah,
that authority in that case
yeah,
to,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that this is all very focused on behaviors and maybe on the person's relationship with food. And there's nothing in there about body image, right? Because to jump
Mm-hmm.
back to when we were talking about body image very briefly, I think that can have a pretty complex relationship with disordered eating. And so jumping to talking about the person's body image is probably a really good way to like put them on the defensive and almost like maybe
Yeah.
supercharge that problem.
Yeah, yeah. If they are making a lot of comments about body, sometimes people, if they do have poor body image, they verbalize it a lot.
Hmm.
Sometimes they might say things like, oh, if I were, 10 pounds less, I could have made that,
Yeah.
gotten that problem. Or like, oh, I feel fat today. Or, if they're doing body checks or something, if they're verbalizing it a lot, that could be another opportunity where you're just saying, I'm observing this, tell me about this. Like, I'm noticing that you're commenting on your body a lot. Is that in your brain a lot? Is that hard for you?
Yeah.
Just I'm there for you. Do you want to help me reframe your thoughts? Whatever. Just kind of like even noticing that that's occurring instead of sort of brushing it off can help the person feel seen and maybe understand that, oh, maybe this is problematic. What is going on in my brain about my body image?
Yeah. That's great. I think the phrase that jumps to mind for me, which I've heard in the climbing community for 15 plus years, I'm sure it goes back much further than that, is people talk about fighting weight, which they're borrowing
Mm-hmm.
from like, uh,
Yeah, like boxing.
combat sports.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've seen that even in my assessment. I'm not calling out any particular person because a bunch of people have written that, but they'll write their weight in there where I ask about people's food habits, and I do ask about their weight. And people will say like, "Oh, I'm like at this weight, but my fighting weight is like such and such."
Mm-hmm.
And I always just find that really interesting because in a combat sport, it makes sense because they have to do a weigh-in. They're in a weight
Yeah,
class. We don't have weight classes in
right.
climbing, and also the weigh-in aspect of combat sports is arguably incredibly unethical.
Yes.
So
There's a
yeah,
lot of problematic things around that.
yeah, and just to tar up on the body image thing for a second, since I've become a coach and an influencer, I've had a number of experiences now where strangers are commenting on my body,
Oh,
negatively or positively. And
yeah.
I don't fall into any particular exciting, visual category, um, other than the fact that I'm quite lean, which I think is the presumption for a normal climber. But, just to pick two of my favorites that stick in my mind every time I think about people commenting on body image. One was somebody saying like, don't take training advice from someone who's 120 pounds, I think was what they wrote, which I was like, well, that's an incredibly fucked up thing to write because you don't know anything about me. Going back to what you
Yeah.
were saying
Yeah.
about you don't know if there's food insecurity, or in my case, I have like issues with the way I digest food. So it's just hard
Hmm.
for me to sustain a large mass. Yeah, and I won't go into the other ones, but basically it's like it's just never good to comment on body image negatively
Right,
or positively. Because
right.
even when people comment telling me that I look good, that's also potentially, if I had a problem, reinforcing
It's reinforcing the negative behavior. Yeah,
exactly. Because I'm like,
yeah,
oh, what I'm doing is making me look a way that's getting me praise. And I could look the exact same way and get both criticism and praise. And it's
yeah.
either way, it's going to reinforce that behavior
Yeah,
that I'm
I'm so
performing.
glad you brought that up. Yeah, there's no good reason to comment on people's bodies unless again you are a doctor or a parent, you're trying to do like a physical assessment and be like, "Oh, I'm concerned you look like you lost weight. Like, let's take you into the doctor."
Hmm.
Something like that. Yeah, I've seen it both ways also with clients. I had one client in particular that I'm thinking of where she just looked like amazing as far as what you would think a climber is, just like super thin, super buff.
Hmm.
And she did not climb at a high level. Like her best climbing grade was not high. And she said people commented, "You look like you should climb better."
Mm.
Like
Wow.
how awful is that?
Yeah.
And yeah, you don't want to comment on people's bodies, whether it seems positive or negative, because even if it seems positive and you're doing a compliment, you're objectifying them.
Hmm.
There's research on this too. There's researchers that literally interviewed people that had REDS and disordered eating and just said, "How are you feeling about your body?" and asked a whole bunch of questions about what they eat. And it came out in these interviews, there's this common theme where people were saying, when people would comment, they would be like, "Oh, your legs look really thin." They would think, "Oh, what I'm doing, I must be doing it right. I need to keep doing it." And they would just dig themselves deeper and deeper into this hole.
Yeah.
So it's not useful to comment on body. But as a coach, you could notice other things. Like you wouldn't say you're looking thin, you could, or even that you're looking strong, like, "Wow, your biceps are
Yeah.
big," or whatever. Just
Yeah.
don't say it, but you could say, "You looked powerful in that move," or like, "Oh, I like that technique you use," or,
Yeah.
"You really stuck it out on that project," saying things that are not related to body at all. Yeah.
Yeah. I love shifting the conversation back to climbing movement and how
Mm-hmm.
people feel on the wall, just because it avoids that whole thing. And also, as a coach, that's the main thing I care about.
Yeah.
I'm in
Yeah.
the weird position where one of the many hats I wear is kind of the personal trainer hat. And so if somebody has aesthetic goals, I'm gonna make some of their training fit those goals. Sometimes people
Mm-hmm.
do want to have like bigger delts or whatever. And in those cases, I just ask them how they think it's going. Like, okay, we've been
Yeah.
doing hypertrophic training for like 3 months now. Like, how do you feel like it's going? And then I at least am letting their self-judgment come out, for better or worse, and we can talk about it. But I definitely don't start the conversation by saying your delts are looking small or big right now, That's not productive. Um, okay, last question on EDs. This is from Ryan, and I feel like we've covered this pretty amply, but I'll just give you another chance to soapbox on
Okay.
it. Ryan says, how often do you find that you recommend to climbers to eat more even when they don't have eating disorders?
Like almost all of my climbers. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
in one of the times before the internet cut out or something happened, we were covering that there's a study where every single study shows that climbers don't eat enough, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. And when I'm doing like, individual assessments, when I'm just doing the one-on-one nutrition for them, yeah, usually they're not eating enough. Or maybe they just need little tweaks, like they just didn't realize how much carbs they need or something like that. Yeah.
hmm.
But I've never had someone come to me where I'm like, "I have nothing for you."
Hmm.
You were perfect. It was amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
not that
great.
there's any perfect diet, but there's optimization and tweaks that we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so other patron question that we haven't covered here is from Angel, and this is going to feel like a huge pivot, but it's just the last question. So,
Okay.
Angel asks, would reducing creatine intake from 5 to 2 grams a day have an effect on me? I started taking creatine about 5 weeks ago. Feel like I'm recovering better, but I'm curious how I would be affected if I half the dose. Feels like a safe experiment to run. What do you think?
Yeah, I would like to ask her why she wants to half the dose if it seems like it's working.
Hmm.
The therapeutic dose, there's lots and lots of studies on creatine. We have a wide body of literature on it. Great therapeutic dose is 3 to 5 grams a day. So if you're
Hmm.
going less than that, I just wonder like what's the point, I'm curious if she has any like symptoms she's not enjoying from the creatine or if she's just trying to save money. But I would recommend just going with the therapeutic dose, like 3 to 5 grams.
Yeah, and I think I've
Um,
seen some fitness
yeah.
bros also taking 3 to 4 times as much as the therapeutic dose, but I have no idea if there's any science
Mm-hmm.
behind that.
There's some emerging evidence, like there's some evidence kind of in its infancy around that, like 10 to 20 grams per day.
Yeah.
And it's usually around people that have some sort of deficit or deficiency. So, like,
Okay.
they're looking at it for like Alzheimer's or cognitive decline in the elderly, or
Hmm.
some sort of muscle atrophy or like traumatic brain injury.
Gotcha.
So they're using like very high doses for that. But if you don't have any sort of medical conditions going on, then it just
Yeah.
seems like you would stick with the 3 to 5 grams, which is just really well researched. Yeah.
Yeah, the class of person that I've seen doing like 20 grams is like they're also drinking White Monsters and like power
Yeah.
cleaning how much I can deadlift. So
Yeah.
I think that they're in a different category entirely. Um, okay, well, wow, this last little run has actually been successful, and we've gotten through a lot of information, which I'm
Yay.
really
You made
happy
it,
for.
man.
I'm gonna give you an opportunity to try to summarize a couple different things here, even though I know we've covered this pretty well, but this will we'll see if we can get it down to a couple sentences. So, what should climbers do when it comes to nutrition?
um
Simple, right?
sure.
Eat
Eat more
more?
food.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the inverse? So what should climbers not do?
Climber, okay. Actually, I see a lot that seems like it's not helpful for people and possibly harmful. So one is trying to lose weight on your own without really knowing why or not understanding if that's even appropriate for you.
Hmm.
Not periodizing that if you are trying to lose weight, and like buying a lot of supplements that like have
Mm.
no evidence or that aren't even third party tested and probably not even safe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
save your money. That's
yeah,
great. And don't talk about other people's body image.
yes, exactly.
Okay, that's great. What about coaches? Because I know that a few coaches listen to this podcast. So in general, what should coaches do?
uh, for what?
Just
Like for
for
nutrition
climbing
or for
nutrition and
climbing?
for their clients, like what is
Okay.
the best piece of advice that you can give to climbing coaches?
Oh, I would love it if coaches could encourage a good atmosphere, like a good, like foster a good relationship with their team, with their sport and their body and with food. So like having positive statements around that, structuring their sessions, if they're like with team kids, structuring their sessions where you're like, hey, you're going to take a break and eat food and drink water right now midway through. Or if it's a coach working, with an adult climber, like a recreational or a pro climber,
Mm-hmm.
same thing where you're asking questions about like, are you eating enough? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about hydration? And then having just the skills or a little bit of knowledge around understanding how to identify if there's some disordered eating going on and how to address that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. And if they're not sure, can people refer their climbers to you? Would that be the
Yeah.
step, or do they need to go see a doctor first? Or
Yeah. They can. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, they can come straight to me. It depends on where they are. I can't work outside the US just based on licensure laws and malpractice insurance. But depending on which state you are, I'm licensed in a lot of states. So I can see most people in the US, depending on where you are. And
okay,
if I can't see you, I can find someone that can see you. I have a network of dietitians I can reach out to. Yeah,
okay,
so
yeah,
reach
great.
out to me for sure. Yeah, I
Yeah,
also
you
have
actually
online
recommended.
courses.
Oh, sorry, yeah, you recommended me my current dietitian, which I
Yes.
appreciate, by the way.
Yeah.
I've been seeing her for a couple months now. Before we get to, I'll let you tell people where they can find you and stuff, but I want to cover the last basic advice. So, what about the no-nos for coaches? What should coaches absolutely not do? I have some guesses, but let's hear your
Yeah,
advice.
I would say don't, we've already hit this, don't objectify people's bodies, like don't comment on body. Um, do not operate outside of your scope of practice. Like don't weigh people. That's a medical data point. You don't
Mm-hmm.
need to know that. Don't weigh people or measure their body composition. If you feel like that needs to happen, have a sports dietitian or a physician do that. Um, I've seen coaches recommend like specific nutritional protocols for people that are either inappropriate or just outside of the scope of the coach. Like they didn't really know what they were talking about, but they thought they did.
Hmm.
Just like realize your limitations as a coach. And I'm not trying to say this to sound condescending. It's just I have a lot of nutrition training, and so that's what I do. I would
Yeah.
never presume to tell my climbing clients anything about coaching. Like it's just like stay within your scope of practice. It's probably not nutrition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excuse me. That makes total sense. And I guess this might be personal interest, so we'll see if I edit this out. But because I just mentioned that my intake form includes asking people their weight, I'm just curious for my personal interest. Maybe I can learn something here. Let me tell you exactly how I ask, and I want to hear if you think that this is unethical or if I should take it out, actually. And I can justify it a little bit and hear what you think. But I
I'm not
say,
here to judge you. It's fine.
so what I want to know when I do an intake form for people basically is I'm just trying to get a general understanding of like how they think about all aspects of their climbing and like what they
Mhm.
know so that I know like what we can talk about and what stuff might be relevant. So I just ask people, do you eat an appropriate diet for an athlete? Do you maintain a healthy weight? Do you consider yourself underweight or overweight? You may include your current weight if you want. That's the
Mhm.
question. Do you think that
Yeah,
that's a fair
I
question?
think that's phrased really well. Yeah. But my question is, if they want to include their weight, why do they do it? I'm just wondering about the mindset. And then what do you do with
Mhm.
that number
Yeah,
as a
I mean,
coach?
that's the tricky part because if it was anything concerning, I immediately need to go have them talk to someone who is more
Hmm.
appropriate person for them to talk to. And
Hmm.
it hasn't gone there. And I think again, that
Right.
probably goes
Yeah.
back to
Yeah.
the demographic, but it is interesting to me to know if they're willing to include it or not. I would say the case where it becomes relevant and it's something that we talk about is, let me see if this is true in my head before I say it out loud. I want to say 100% of the time when weight comes up in our consults or in aspects of the climbing, it's because the climber considers themselves to have some visceral fat that they could lose, like they're
Hmm. Yeah.
outside of a healthy BMI,
Yeah.
on the overweight side. I don't think
Yeah.
that there's been a single case where somebody has considered themselves to be at an unhealthy weight to the lower side, or that
Hmm.
I've
Yeah.
considered to be unhealthy at
Yeah.
the lower side.
So I don't think it's necessarily inappropriate that you ask that. And I'm not here to like judge you. And
I
this is
want to
out of my
know.
scope. I'm not a
Yeah.
coach, so I don't know what coaches need to assess. But
Yeah.
yeah, if it feels like it's a screening tool to understand where they're at or to further refer them if they need that, that would make sense that you would include that
Yeah.
number. That would also give you a clue into how they feel about their own body, which would be helpful for you as a coach.
Hmm.
Um, the concern I have when I was talking about like, hey, don't weigh your is I was thinking more like a competition like team kid type of aspect where like some coaches just like weigh quarterly or monthly or
Mm.
weekly or whatever for like no apparent reason, like they don't
Interesting.
really have a strategy as to what you're going to do with these weight data points, and they don't really have the uh training to understand if this is even a good or a bad weight for this person. They don't have access to the kids' growth charts. They're not coordinating with the pediatrician. Like these are things that me as a dietitian would do, but like I'm not seeing a coach do that. And then that kind of crosses into like, are you now practicing medicine?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I think as an individual coach, if you're just like, I'm curious if my client is comfortable or not uncomfortable with their weight, do we need to talk about this? Is this affecting how they're climbing or how they're thinking about how they're climbing? Or, that would make sense. It's just like, can we be
Yeah.
careful with people's data? Can we comply with laws? Can we be ethical? Can we honor the person's autonomy and honor how much they want to disclose? And if they want to give you that information, then what do you do with it now? Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's just kind of weird. I'm just like, I don't know if coaches, especially if you're a coach of a lot of different kids on a team, that just doesn't seem necessary to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Um, okay, well, thanks. Those were one sentence answers, but I'm really glad that we went down those little rabbit holes.
Sorry.
No, that's ideal, actually. It's like what I want. Truthfully, this has been of all the podcasts I've done, I think I have actually learned the most while doing it. So
Oh,
actually,
that's
I
awesome.
really, despite
I
all the
love that.
interruptions, it's been incredibly valuable for me personally. So I hope my audience also gets a lot out of it. Where can people find you and how can people work with you?
Yeah, they can find me. I have my private practice is called Real Nutrition. So that's just realnutritionllc.com. I also have a website called nutritionforclimbers.com. I have a lot of resources on there, and you can contact me through there. My Instagram handle is at Real Nutrition Dietitian. And yeah, I have a lot of resources. So I work one-on-one with clients. I do a lot of team workshops. I've done a ton of them for climbing teams throughout the country and other countries. I have on-demand courses, and I have my book that is going to be published in just a couple weeks. So very
Wow.
excited about that.
Yeah, super exciting. Thank you so much for all the information you put out in the world and for coming on the show. I know it was really complicated. I appreciate your patience with it.
Technology was not our friend.
It's all good. We'll fix it. I'll edit it up and post it. It'll sound great. Cool.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse.
Yes, thank you so much, Marissa.